What if I told you Amazon's secret to building successful products isn't in only their execution, but in how they plan their products? So today we're going to break down the PRFAQ framework, the same method Amazon uses to validate products before writing a single line of code. And if you've ever wondered how tech giants consistently launch game-changing products, you won't want to miss this episode. So stick around and we'll break down what the PRFAQ framework is and if it's right for you and your team. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome. I am super stoked to have you. Have you picked up your paperback copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes yet? Unlock the secrets of UX success and learn all the things they didn't teach you in school. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book to learn more. This week's episode is brought to you by Backlog, a community of designers building their businesses together. If you've been dreaming of escaping the 9-to-5 and building your own business, Backlog is the community for you. Backlog brings together hungry designers turned entrepreneurs, all working to grow their freelance gigs, content, digital products, and design agencies. Join a network of like-minded folks sharing tactics, strategies, and systems to help you succeed. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/backlog and become part of a community that's building their businesses together. Don't wait. Find your path to independence with Backlog. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, and Adina for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. You can get instant access to video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So the PRFAQ framework. It's something I hadn't heard of until my guest today reached out about his new book, Marcello Calbucci. I am so excited to have him on to talk about not just his book, but the PRFAQ framework and how we can use it on our teams to help us make better decisions about the products that we are building. Marcello Calbucci is an entrepreneur, technologist, innovator, and author with over 25 years of experience in the tech industry. He's held key roles at Microsoft and Amazon and has founded and led startups in both Seattle and London. Marcello is the author of the new book, PRFAQ Framework, Adapting Amazon's Innovation Framework to Work for You, a comprehensive guide that breaks down Amazon's powerful PRFAQ method into an accessible playbook for innovators, startups, founders, and product managers. And outside of tech and startups, Marcello loves to cook elaborate meals for friends. We'll talk more about that later. Run marathons, 8 and counting, that is very impressive, and travel with his wife and kids. Marcello, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Thank you for having me, Jeremy. I'm looking forward to deliver some awesome content for your listeners.
So I am so excited to have you on the show today to talk about the PRFAQ framework. I think this is something as designers, we often talk about how do we become more strategic thinkers? How do we get that seat at the table? And this method, I think, is a really great way for us to do that. So before we jump into the PRFAQ framework, you've got a very interesting backstory, and I think everybody would love to hear a little bit more about you. So tell us about you. How'd you get into this business? And ultimately, how did you find the PRFAQ framework? And how'd you get to write the book about it?
So everything started for me when I was a teenager and I got my first computer. And maybe differently than other teenagers, I really fell in love with programming. So I got hooked into the idea of creating software to help people do small tasks around the house or small business for the family. So I really liked software. So I got into a computer science college in Brazil. I graduated, and shortly after that, Microsoft went to Brazil to recruit people to bring to the US. And I was one of those. So I ended up in the US, spent 7 years at Microsoft. Most of my time there was working on Bing, the search engine. Then I felt that urge to, be more entrepreneurial. I left and I spent 18 years founding startups, working startup studios, both Seattle and London, like you mentioned on the intro. And then Amazon reached out to me and they're like, hey, we have a new project. We think it would be great to lead this project. So I ended up joining Amazon 3 years ago, which is the opposite of a startup, if you will. Amazon at any given time has between 1.5 and 2 million employees around the world. And I joined Amazon and very, very quickly, first week in the job, I was exposed to this framework, the PRFAQ. They invented 20 years ago. By the way, PRFAQ stands for Press Release and Frequently Asked Questions. We'll talk more about that later. So I was exposed to the framework, and your first reaction to it is like, this is odd. This is so strange, the way they do things. They have like 20 minutes of reading this document in a meeting before anyone saying any word. And then you start the discussions and debates around the topic. And like the first 2, 3, 4 times that you see the document, which has a very specific style and format and way of writing, like you feel this is so strange. Like you can't get your head around it. But then, at one point it clicks. You go like, oh, wow, this is really powerful because we are discussing the important stuff. We are not debating the details or the things that don't matter. Like we're really focused on the big picture. And, as the months went by, I really started enjoying using that format and that style. And then I started to realize, this would be very valuable for innovators and product leaders and founders outside of Amazon. So that was always on the back of my mind. And when I left Amazon to start a new company, I paused and I said, what if I write a book about PRFAQ and let the world know about this framework? So that's how the book came to be. As soon as I left Amazon, I sat down, did some research, what it takes to write a book, because I never done it before. And then I did it, wrote a book and published just a couple months ago.
Right on. I love it. Yeah, this is such an interesting thing. And I know a lot of people have probably heard about Jeff Bezos's rule. I guess, I don't know if it was his rule, but there's, you got to write up a thing, or it was like 5 pages about something, and you have to write these memos, and the meeting can't start until everybody does it, or no one discusses the feature until you've written this thing. So when people are talking about those memos, is this what they're referring to, the PRFAQ? This is something, does every team at Amazon do this, or is this just like a select few people choose to do it, or what is the process at Amazon as it relates to this? Is it mandatory?
Yeah. So Amazon has multiple formats. So I would say there's maybe 12 or 15 different frameworks that Amazon uses for everything, right? To discuss new projects like the PRFAQ, but also to discuss customer issues, to discuss the state of the business, to discuss employee promotion, to discuss recruiting. Like each one of those has a memo format. They are usually 6 pages. They're not 5. They're not 7. They're 6 pages.
That's a very specific number.
Very
6.
specific. Yes. They can be smaller sometimes. There's some frameworks at Amazon that are smaller than that. And that's okay too, but they are never more than 6 pages. And you ask, like, do people use it? Are they forced to use it? Yes, everyone at Amazon uses it. It's part of the culture. It's a tribal knowledge around Amazon that, like, every time you want to pitch a new business, not pitch, you want to talk about a new business, a new product, a new idea, a new process, a new policy, a new service, you write a PRFAQ first. Right. And then you don't want to write alone. You write with other people. And then when you're ready, you start like reviews with folks about this idea.
I love it. Now, you mentioned that there were 12 or 14, I think you said, other frameworks. Was there a reason why you gravitated more towards the press release and FAQ framework versus maybe some of the others? Is it worth maybe explaining the differences between some of these and why this one you think is so valuable versus some of the others? Or maybe maybe there's going to be 12 other books. You're going to write a book about each one. But I'm curious, what about the PRFAQ really struck you?
Yeah, the PRFAQ is the one that is like forward-looking, right? Is the one that you paint a vision. So because I was a founder for so long, I felt like this is really interesting. Like I could have used that every time I did a new startup or every time I started a new product within another company or like make major change to a product. So that's why I gravitated towards that one. So it's because it's the vision strategy for something that you're going to build.
Got it. All right, so let's dig into it. The PRFAQ, you mentioned before, press release and frequently asked questions. Tell us a little bit more about the 6 pages, not less, not more, 6. So tell us a little bit about the framework and the template for this and what it is. And then what I'd love to do after that, let's dig in a little bit about like who's it for, when would you use it and all that stuff. But first, let's talk a little bit about about the actual framework itself. PRFAQ, press release frequently asked questions. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. And I think there was a few elements that we need to talk to your audience as well, because there's a lot of text. And when you talk with designers, it's like, wait a second, you're not going to include any wireframes or mocks or screenshots on this. So the answer is no. But basically, the PRFAQ has three components to it, if you will. One is the template, like the document that is 6 pages long. The second one is how you write your sentences and your paragraphs. That's called precise writing. And the third one is how do you write and review and use the PRFAQ to make the decision, right? So it's the method behind the framework. So the first part, the template of the PRFAQ has three parts to it. The first part is the press release. It's not a press release that you're going to send to the press. It's not a marketing tool. It's really a decision tool, right? And you write a press release to paint a vision of the future. So you write the press release as if the idea that you're trying to create is already here. So you can say like, today we are launching XYZ to serve customer W, to do A, B, and C. That is part of your press release. So everyone reading knows that we haven't done anything yet, but we're trying to paint a picture of the future. So you're priming everyone who's reading it to say like, this is what we're talking about. The second page of the PRFAQ is the customer FAQs. So you're going to write 5 to 8 FAQs as if the customer is asking a question to you. For example, how much this is going to cost? Do I need to import my data? Where do I get started? Things like that. And then you have 4 pages of internal FAQs. And these are the most important ones because they speak directly to the strategy, to the feasibility, to the viability of the business, to research that has been done, to discoveries that have been done or we need to do. What is assumption? What is fact? So the internal FAQs are going to be questions such as, what problem are we trying to solve? Who is the customer? Is this problem growing or, not growing for the customer? How severe it is? How are customers solving this problem today? What is the shortcomings of the existing solutions? Like all those questions are part of the internal FAQs. So that's the template of the PRFAQ. You might have an appendix, right? And I think for your audience, we might talk about this. And in the appendix, you might include a wireframe or two, or maybe a diagram or two. But you really try to avoid that. And the reason you try to avoid that, Jeremy, is the minute you put one wireframe or one high fidelity screenshot, that's what people are going to talk about. Full stop. They stop talking about the why we're doing this, what outcome do we want, what is important. They're just going to critique that one screen. So you have to be very careful here because what you're really trying to decide is like, should we do this project or not? Not how and what exactly is this project going to have.
I love that distinction because that was the first thing that I was kind of thinking about is, we often say picture's worth 1,000 words and you can get an idea across with a, wireframe, certainly in a certain way that you wouldn't be able to do it if you were explaining it. But just like to your point, this is sort of, we often say start with low fidelity because people are going to focus, I don't like that color blue. Oh, have you thought about the spacing and blah, blah, blah. And so that's not the point of this. And I love that because when we think about, the work that we do in general as designers and the artifacts that we create, each of those artifacts serves a certain purpose. And, sometimes they serve multiple purposes but they often serve a very specific purpose. And so in this case, the purpose of this document is to validate the idea and whether or not the team should even spend time doing it, which I love. I love that idea. And this is, again, we mentioned this in the beginning, but UX designers are often seen as sort of, pixel pushers by a lot of teams, or we've already figured it out. Let's just design it or make it pretty, things like that. And I love that the idea of a designer writing this or being involved with writing this, being a partner, flexing that strategic muscle that often designers, a lot of times struggle with. So I love that. Now I have a question though. 6 pages, very specific, not 5, not 7, 6. What is the rationale behind 6 pages exactly? Is it that if you don't have 6 pages, you need to think more about it, or if you have 7 or 8 pages, you're trying to do too much? What is the rationale behind 6 exactly? Do you have any thoughts there?
So Amazon experimented with different lengths documents, right? Anyway, from 10 pages to 4 pages. And what they learned is that when they only have 4 pages, it's not enough. It's not enough space to capture the entire idea. And when they had 10 pages, the meeting would be completely hijacked by the document and you wouldn't have any time to discuss. So the 6-page end up being just about between 18 minutes and 20 minutes of reading time. So the reason that everyone at Amazon does this often is like start with a document is that to have a productive conversation, you want everyone to be on the same page. And people are busy, right? They are going from meeting to meeting. They are working on different projects. They need to do that context switch on their mind. So once you start a meeting by reading a document, you guarantee that everyone there starting from the same point.
So, and that was another question that I was going to have. Like, the idea wouldn't be to send it beforehand because, just to your point, you want everybody to start that meeting having finished it and having that fresh in their minds versus read it 2 days ago and maybe, I don't know, misinformation effect. They thought about something else and they kind of misremember what they read or whatever. Is that the idea? Everybody reads it, even if you read it before, you read it again.
Yeah, it's okay to send ahead of time, right? So I think it's even polite to send ahead of time. Like if you're going to sit in a meeting and you're going to send them a PRFAQ, probably send it like 4 hours earlier or more, because some people, they read slower or they have a pattern of reading that doesn't fit into the meeting setting, right? Maybe they need to be in a specific chair or whatever they're going to do for reading. Like not everyone is going to read at the same speed. So sending ahead of time, you give a chance to some people that don't feel comfortable to read everything, in the meeting to do that. But you should have no expectation that people did it, right? So that's why you always block the 20 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to say like, we're going to read it and, take your own notes, highlight whatever you want to highlight, and then we're going to discuss.
I love that. So I'm going to dig a little bit more into the PRFAQ document itself because I've got a ton of questions about how they work and when's a good time to use it, when's not a good time to use it. But let's talk about one in maybe more detail. Do you have an example that we could sort of run through that kind of highlights, the press release and what that might look like, and then some of I know you gave some examples of the questions a minute ago, but would it be worthwhile doing that, going through an example?
Well, I can talk. It's long, so we can't really go into the details of the examples. But I can say, first of all, people can go to my website and download examples of PRFAQs. So I wrote several examples. I think that should be the first thing you do, right? Just to get a sense of like what we're talking about, what this furniture looks like, right? So start there. That's the important thing. I can give a couple of examples from myself, from a startup, and from Amazon as well. So at Amazon, every time you're going to start a new product, it doesn't matter if it is a team of 5 or 50 people or even 500 people, you're going to write a PRFAQ. And that's the instrument that's going to be used to decide if this is worth pursuing or not. So on my personal case, I wrote a PRFAQ for my own book, and it was a PRFAQ that no one read. But what that did for me is to help me understand who's my customer and what problem are they trying to solve if they buy this book, right? And what is the solutions that I'm proposing in the book? And how are they going to find the book, right? So the PRFAQ helps you find the gaps in your thinking. Because it's not the template is not very structured like a business model canvas or a lean UX canvas or something like that you fill out these gaps here and great. It's a narrative format. So you write it. But as you go writing, as you probably know this already, most people know intuitively, which is it's really hard to write incoherent text because your brain goes like, this doesn't sound right. Like you feel some type of anxiety when you read a text that you wrote that is like, this is not adding up. So writing helps you think through your problem in better ways. And by the way, there is scientific research around it. I read a ton of that as I prepared to write the book. And so I wrote, a PRFAQ for my own book to understand who was my customer and what problem they were trying to solve. And it's the interesting thing here is I started thinking that I was going to write a PRFAQ book for founders. And I was like, startup founders are the one that going to enjoy this. And then as I was writing the PRFAQ for the book, I realized, there's more people that have this problem. Let me look at that. And then I realized, wait a second, product managers, designers, innovators, researchers, scientists have this problem conveying idea in a very strategic, way. So let me take a step back. And what I call my customer now are innovators. These are my customers. I don't say my customers are like startup founders, are innovators. I don't care if you work at a big company, if you're a small business owner, like if you're a founder, like doesn't matter, right? You're an innovator. You're going to invent something new or change something that already exists. So the PRFAQ helps you think through that problem.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. So this is really cool. I love this a lot. So I want to maybe talk a little bit about you mentioned at least like who's this for. I would love to sort of understand a little bit about when's a good time to use it. When do you actually know, oh, you know what, this is actually a perfect time to use this? Or in Amazon's case, is there just a set of maybe steps that they always go through when they're building products and they say this is the PRFAQ step? Or when would someone use this? Is there any thought there?
So I made a few changes from what Amazon does, because Amazon is a very resourceful company. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of people. They can do things very differently. So Amazon can spend like a month, 2 months, 3 months working a single PRFAQ. Most organizations don't have that kind of appetite or even resources to do that, particularly startups, right? So what I try to do is change how folks do PRFAQs. So that's why the title of my book is Adapting Amazon's Innovation Framework, not like explaining Amazon's innovation framework. So, the ideal moment for you to do in a perfect world, you would start a PRFAQ before you start your project. So it's the decision to start another project. So you're going to paint a vision and you're going to explain the strategy. And by the way, strategy is a set of choices, right? You're saying yes to certain things. You're saying no to other things. A very simple example here is like, are we going to do a mobile app first, or are we going to do a web experience first? That is a strategic decision, right? And you incorporate things like that in this document. And what I say is usually like PRFAQ is the pre-day one document, right? So you write before you commit to doing something. So you're using the PRFAQ to build conviction. Should we do this or should we not do this? So because of that, most PRFAQs will lead to no go. We're not going to do this, because as you start discovering, you realize, well, the problem is not as big, or the customers have a very satisfactory solution, or like we don't have the resources to do what we thought we could do. So it's totally okay to say like, we spend this time, we spend a week or two on the PRFAQ, and like our decision is not to do this, right? But sometimes you have ideas that you go like, this sounds right. It fits what we need. It fits the company goals. It fits our resources that we can do. The timeline feels right. So let's go ahead and execute this. And then you have times that feels like it is right, but you have other priorities. So basically you have projects that you can start, but you put on the back burner for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months.
Okay. Now it's interesting because you mentioned starting a project, kicking off a project, like I assume from scratch. What I was thinking when we were initially talking about this was even like, I was almost thinking about like features, like we've got a feature, we're thinking about launching like, we have a way to do a thing. We want to launch a team space or projects or whatever it is. And we're trying to understand that. Do you think that makes sense? Like to do that from like a feature, or are we talking just straight up 0 to 1? We've got nothing. Does it make sense to think about it in terms of feature sets?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So what I say is PRFAQs are good for a business, a product, a program, a policy, a process, a service, either if you're creating one or changing one. And features for me falls into the category of changing something that already exists in a product. However, you have to think about the overhead, right? It takes a week or two to write a PRFAQ. So if you're doing a feature that it has a small impact on the business, it might even, of course, it is to enhance the product, but it's going to have a small impact over the long term, and it's going to take a week to do that. It's probably not worth doing a PRFAQ because the overhead is too high, right? But if it is a feature, even if it is a small one that could have catastrophic impact or extreme impact to the business, then you probably want to write a PRFAQ so everyone can collaborate and provide their point of view on the document. So one thing we didn't talk about is how do you write a PRFAQ, really? Because you have an author, like the person who's like putting words to paper, right? But this person is not doing this alone. So they're going to go out there and get the input from other people to collaborate on that. And you do that through review sessions. So they write the first draft of the PRFAQ. It doesn't matter if it's not great. It doesn't matter if it has a lot of gaps. And then they sit with different functions or different teams. It could be like, hey, I'm going to sit with the engineering team first, and then the design team, and then the product team, and the legal team, the marketing, the sales, the finance, compliance. And like, I'm going to get their perspective. Like they are looking at this object from different angles and telling like, this is good, this is dangerous, this is not going to work. Have you considered that? And this person goes back and incorporate that into the document. So what that does is everyone is part of the creation here.
I love that. All right. So, well, let me ask you this. How do you determine who the author should be for this? Because there's one main author, it sounds like, and then I've got a team of people that kind of help me give input. Is there a way to determine who, is it the person who has the idea, or is there someone else that should be designated the author? How do you generally advise people to do that?
Yeah, it should be the person who is going to be leading the execution of this. It doesn't have to be like a director or a VP, but it can be. But it is the person that's going to be like the accountable person, right? That's going to be like, I'm going to make this happen if this gets approved. What it shouldn't be is a person that writes the PRFAQ and then hands it off to another team to execute, right? Like the team that executes should be the one that like wrote it.
I love that. We talked about the right time to use it. You mentioned a couple examples of maybe not the right time to use it, but I'm curious, any other thoughts about not the right time to use it? You mentioned, a small feature doesn't have a lot of impact, or what are your thoughts there? Any other things?
Yeah. So, because it has the press release on it, some people get confused that you should use this just before you launch a product. That's too late, right? This is not a marketing tool. This is really an early stage, vision and strategy tool. So, you can use halfway through a project if you realize that, we are not aligned. People are like moving in different directions. We are having a ton of meeting, a ton of friction. There's frustration happening. Take a step back and say like, let's write a PRFAQ and bring this together so we can all agree that this is what we're doing. This is who we are serving. This is the problem that we're addressing. So you can do that halfway through the project if you start seeing a lot of misalignment and miscommunication. But late in the project, it's not as useful anymore.
All right, UX fam, it is time for another mid-roll sponsor break. Let's hear it from our sponsor this week, Wix Studio. Okay, web designers, let's talk about the C word, creative burnout. Your client site has real portfolio potential, but between resourcing, feedback, tight budgets, and even tighter deadlines, it just doesn't make the cut. Wix Studio helps close that gap. Built for agencies and enterprises, you can bring your vision to life and keep it alive. With no-code animations, tons of AI tools, reusable design assets, and advanced layout tools. For your next project, check out wixstudio.com. That's wixstudio.com. And now, back to the show. What I like to think about, too, you mentioned, the size and scope and that kind of plays into it. One question that I like to ask a lot is, what if we're wrong? What happens? And I think that's a really great way. You mentioned before, it has catastrophic impacts to the business or whatever. And this is something that I think, I think is worth asking quite often about, how much research should we do? Should we do research at all? Is it worth doing 6 months of discovery or versus not? And the question is, what if we're wrong? If we ship this and it isn't right, is it, like you said, catastrophic to the business, or is it a tiny little blip and it doesn't really make a huge impact? That's kind of what I'm curious what your thoughts are there. Do you have anything to add to that? Because that's a question I like to ask about just all kinds of stuff, but it seems like it applies here.
The PRFAQ is not going to prevent mistakes, but it's going to reduce the likelihood they happen, right? So what you're doing is you get informed about important aspects of the business that you might forget, right? It's just like a small oversight early on, but like it comes back to bite you later. So I don't think PRFAQ is going to guarantee success, but it does move you. It helps minimize failure. That's what it does, right? And you can write a PRFAQ, go and execute the project. And then as you are executing, even before you succeed or fail, you realize some major thing happened, right? A major discovery about the customer, a competitor launched something, the API that you were going to use doesn't have the data that you thought it had. The research came back with some things that weren't incorporated early on, but the project already started. That is a time to pause and say, like, we probably need a new strategy, right? And then you rewrite the PRFAQ with a new strategy. So you refresh and say, like, this is what we're doing. What you're not going to do is like change strategies back and forth throughout executing the project, because then you're definitely going to get a product that does not address something that people agree on. But once you launch, you still have to do a lot of things to make sure that you're successful. So what I say, there is phases on your business that are going to write different versions of PRFAQ, right? Are you testing the hypothesis about the problem? Are you testing a hypothesis about the solution? Are you testing a hypothesis about scaling and in efficiency of the product? Are you testing a hypothesis about improving the business outcomes and revenue, right? All that stuff. So as you go through your business and it matures, you use different styles of PRFAQs.
I love that. That's interesting. So in the book, do you dig into those little areas? We don't need to give away everything here, but do we dig into that? Is that worth digging into now? I'm curious.
Yeah, I talk a little bit, right? So if you have a product that has been around for 5 years and, you're probably applying optimization, you have product market fit, it's working, right? So you might be adding more features, but very likely as well, you're trying to optimize certain things, retention, engagement, some key metrics that drive business revenue. So it's a very different style of PRFAQ than one that is like, we don't even know if customers have this problem. Like we're just starting like a brand new startup here or a brand new product within a big company.
Then the FAQs you're writing would be very different, right? Like
Yes.
would our current customers find this useful? Would current customers pay more for it? Or, things like that. That's interesting. I like that a lot. So I'm curious, in your experience, I would love to talk a little bit about some of your personal experience using the PRFAQ. Would you be able to speak to a time when, the PRFAQ kind of saved the day and kind of kept you from making the wrong decision, or maybe even had you think about something in a new way that was, then allowed you to kind of pivot and ultimately become a success? Do you have any anecdotes or anything that you could share? I'm curious what your personal experiences have been. Obviously, it's been impactful.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to talk to that because you're always speaking in hindsight, right? And you're looking back and say like, yeah, it helped me because we identified this element that we weren't thinking about. So in general, I like to think the PRFAQ helps you. It's almost like a checklist. It's not a checklist because you write a narrative. But as you're writing this narrative, you're checking things in your brain that's like, oh yeah, we need to think about that. We need to think about this. We need to think about this other thing. So, it's not unusual. Actually, I'll give an example here. Earlier this year, I was considering starting a new service for founders, like an investment, help founders do better, all kinds of stuff. And I started from an assumption, right? That like founders have been using things like that in the past. And like we could deliver the same service. I could work with a few investors to create that product for founders. I started writing a PRFAQ for it. And as I was writing the PRFAQ, I realized, oh, you know what? I need to talk with a few founders that fall into the category of founders that I'm describing here. I was very specific about the founders that I was going after. So I reached out to about 12 founders and talked to them. And in a week, this project went from like, I'm so excited about this to this project's not going to work, because the PRFAQ forced me to like ask a question to myself to realize that I didn't have the information, to go research that information, to come back and it's like, this is going to be a mistake. And if I hadn't done that, I would have continued this project, right? And only 6 months, 12 months later, I would have realized that something is off. Why is this not working? Right. But then you are like so into the product and the project already that you're going to miss the big picture.
Yeah, I love that. That was actually going to be one of the questions I was going to ask you next was, how often have you started writing the PRFAQ and realized maybe even halfway through, like, this is pointless. I don't even want to finish this because I know it's a terrible idea. Does that happen more often than not? I'm curious. Like, how often do PRFAQs turn into sort of like just a dead end? You're like, nah, I'm done. This is
Yeah, it definitely does. And I'll tell you what, Jeremy, like people do that all the time, regardless of PRFAQ, right? I'll give an example. When you start typing an email message or you make a note on a document that like, I'm going to write a document about this. And then like, you write a few sentences and you stop and you go like, no, erase it, right? That's your brain telling you like, this is not a good direction. So the PRFAQ is the same thing, right? You start writing and then like, maybe on the first page, you go like, no, stop, right? This is the method working actually. It's not a failure. It's you telling yourself like, I can't progress with this. So my guess is if you're a founder or if you're really open-minded about it, more than 50% of your PRFAQs are not going to get to the end. You're going to stop before you get to the end because you realize this is not the right thing, not the right one. So you might pivot to another format or another approach or a different problem, a different solution, whatever that is. But you fall short of like finishing it.
Yeah, and one of the things I keep going back to this, but I love this idea because humans are not rational beings. Economists like to think we're rational, but I do not believe that we are. And we fall for things like sunk cost fallacy all the time. We'll spend 2 months, 6 months, a year doing something that we know objectively, or someone from the outside can objectively look at it and say, this is a failure. Why are you continuing to waste time and money and resources on this thing? And what I love about the PRFAQ framework is it's a way to think about those things well in advance before you ever start it, just like you said, so that you can avoid the sunk cost fallacy. And I think for me, that's one of the most beneficial parts of this is to get you thinking objectively about it before you invest all that time, money, resources, and then you're stuck. And then people just, I can't do it now. We already dropped $1 million on this thing. We got to keep going. So I think that's a brilliant.
I have a whole chapter on the book about fallacies. The title of the book, the chapter is Truth Seeking. And I talk about confirmation bias, about group thinking, about the curse of knowledge, everything that goes like that. If you don't pay attention to it, you're just going to keep going, and not question yourself of the validity of the idea. So, the PRFAQ helps with that naturally because it's part of the process of writing. Your brain activates different parts that help avoid those elements.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, something else one of my old teams we used to do a pre-mortem. So, if you're listening and you aren't familiar, post-mortem, something fails, it goes wrong, you do a post-mortem to sort of root cause analysis to figure out what went wrong. A pre-mortem is sort of, you do that well in advance before you start and you say, what could go wrong? What would cause this thing to be a complete failure? And I sort of relate this in a way to that pre-mortem, but having a sort of very specific framework and getting you to think about it. It's a similar kind of outcome where you've thought about this ahead of time, you've mitigated some of the risks. Pre-mortem's a little different because that's more tactical execution stuff when you're maybe ready to go. But I love this sort of the using something like that in conjunction with this once you decide to do it, thinking about these things well in advance before you start designing anything, before you start writing a single line of code, before you even get budget for it. And this is just such a profound thing. I don't know, I keep saying that. I know I'm like gushing over this idea, but it's just such a wonderful, helpful thing that I think, everybody's going to benefit from learning this method. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I love the idea of calling it a pre-mortem for strategy or vision.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, you could use that. Go ahead, coin it. It's yours. I'll let you have it. So one of the things I want to talk about here, I want to talk more about the PRFAQ as a team sport and how you see people sort of working together. We've sort of touched on this a little bit. You've got one author that sort of reaches out. But I'm curious, when you think about the concept of pre-mortem, a lot of people listening, they're designers. You mentioned the people authoring this are probably going to be more maybe the product owners or product managers, people who are owning the execution. But I'm curious, is there a space, do you think, for designers to get involved? And where do you see UX professionals, designers, product designers, whatever you want to call them, getting involved with this process if they're not the authors themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. There is some PRFAQs that are not going to have designers involved because they might be a PRFAQ about replacing a vendor, for example, an IT vendor. Like that's not necessarily going to have designer. But if there is like a consumer component or an end user component, then you definitely need to have designers involved, right? And I think designers are going to get involved in multiple ways. One is discovery and research, right? That is the early on to really understand, like you want a designer at the table when you're doing discovery to understand, like, does this problem exist? What exactly is this problem? Designers have a different eye to observe what people say and capture that information in UX research documents, right? So I think that's very important. The other thing is the PRFAQ has both a problem section, right? Like the state of the market, which are facts. Like this problem exists, this many people have this problem, this is the solutions that exist in the market. This is all facts. You shouldn't be, writing opinions about it, right? But then you have the solution section, like how we're going to build this, what are the strategy, like how we're going to go to market. That's what I call like the opinion section and assumptions, right? And between here and here, there is an ideation in the middle, right? There is like, you have to think about how can we solve this and what are the pros and cons of solving that. The PRFAQ does not prescribe any ideation format. You can use design thinking, sprint, any generative framework that you can come up with, but you need to capture that in the PRFAQ. This is where I think designers can help a lot as well, regardless if they are the owner of the PRFAQ or not.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I'm curious if you are, and I know you're not a UX designer specifically, but thinking about UX designers and how they can get involved. You mentioned research. You mentioned, maybe an appendix with some designs, or maybe even like designs just to think through it. I'm curious, where are some, like, if a designer catches wind that, this type of thing isn't happening, because this is often a critique of, the larger software team. Designers, they don't get the seat at the table like they want. They want more, a bigger hand in decision making and the quote unquote seat at the table. If they don't see this happening, are there ways that designers can maybe push to get involved and maybe offer to help? Or, maybe even if a designer can, and this is something that maybe this is the way I want to ask this question. For a designer, let's say they see a thing going down, they aren't really happy with it. Would you recommend like a designer putting something like this together as a means of helping to solve the larger problem, even if the larger team didn't necessarily ask for it? Or do you think that's a mistake?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I have an answer that I can say, take that to the bank, right? But I would say it depends very much on the culture of the organization. Let's start there, right? In some organizations, a designer might propose that, like, how about we write, a PRFAQ or another document, if you prefer to write another document that is not a PRFAQ, that's okay too, that talk about value for the customer and value for the business. That's the language that should be part of every project. Like, why are we doing this? What outcome are we seeking for the business? And what outcome are we seeking for the customer? We always need to elevate the conversation to that level.
I love that. Yeah. And that's often the discourse in the zeitgeist today is, designers need to learn the business and learn to talk about the business the same way the CEO does, or designers need to think like a CEO and things like that, which is, again, where I think this is such a valuable thing. We're not even designing anything in pixels. Obviously, we're designing, thoughts, and we're designing, strategies, but we're not designing pixels. And one of the things I was thinking, and the reason why I asked this question, this thought came across the other day at work. We were working on something and there was a disagreement, or there was a, lack of understanding, or whatever it was. And I was thinking to myself, I would think the team could benefit from this sort of document. And I didn't start it, I didn't do it, but now that we're having this conversation, I think I'm going to go and spend the time to actually do it. But it was sort of one of those things where I wouldn't be the owner, I wouldn't be the person in charge of the execution, but I do believe that it's a conversation starter at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something where I think, even if the PRFAQ framework's not adopted, for me at least, I think it's sort of a conversation starter. It's a way to get the team thinking. It's a way to get them talking. Even if you're completely wrong, it starts a conversation. It gets people saying, well, let me tell you how it's wrong. Well, this is why that isn't right. Here's what's actually happening. And maybe it changes your mind in a way too, but it's just a really great way, I think, for a conversation starter. That's the reason why I asked that question. I could just see sort of even that on its own being valuable.
Yeah. So, I say this, the PRFAQ has 3 superpowers. It gives you, a team 3 superpowers. They are think critically, because writing is a process of thinking. The second one is to articulate an idea. And the third one is to inspire people. And the articulate an idea is probably the most valuable one. And I say that because as you write, you learn how to tell a story about a new product, a feature, a business, whatever, that is very compelling, right? And engages people in conversation. And it doesn't go into the weeds of which cloud provider we're going to use, which button color we're going to use, or which design pattern we're going to use, right? It's a different conversation, right? It really keeps you in that realm of we're doing this because this is good for the customer and this is going to be the impact for the business. So I've been lucky. I worked with some amazing designers in the past who were very strategic in the way they approach problems. And what often happens, what I observe is the designers that are not as strong, they do not understand, engagement, retention, customer acquisition, and the key metrics. And so they present ideas, but they don't articulate how this idea is actually going to translate into something that is better for the customer or better for the business, right? And it needs to be both. You can't just say like, yes, we're going to give this for free to customers, but then we're going to bankrupt the business, right? So you have to know how to balance that. And I'm not the one that's going to teach designers how to do that, but the PRFAQ does help you think and articulate better those stories.
Yeah, I love that. And this is again one of the reasons I love this too. Designers are often told on social media, you go scroll through LinkedIn, the first post you're going to find is going to be something about designers should think like a CEO. I see it all the time. And it's, such a nebulous concept. And when you tell a designer who has not had an MBA, who's never thought like a CEO before, they have no idea what that means. They don't understand how to think like a CEO because that advice is just, very shallow. But thinking about this framework, I think, is a really great way for designers to flex that muscle and practice that skill and then share it with the team and say, well, you missed this, you missed that, you missed this other thing, or this assumption is incorrect, or whatever it is. And it's a really great way for you to understand your business, not just thinking like a CEO, but thinking like your CEO, thinking like your executive team that cares about your very specific business. Because businesses and CEOs and executives are not monoliths. They all have different opinions. They all have different thoughts. They all have different ways of working. They all have different contexts. And this is a really great way to put it on paper, think about it, put it on paper, and then share it and get feedback. And then I think the next time you write another one, you're gonna go and write that next PRFAQ with that understanding from the last one. And every time you do it, you're gonna get better at it, and you're gonna get better, even if the decisions never get greenlit, right? Even if it's a failure every time, or failure is the wrong word. Even if we decide to pass on the idea, you're still gaining that incredible insight and learning, and you're thinking, just like you said, about the business, because, UX designers often think about users, and a lot of times we don't tend to think about the business. And so to me, this is such an important thing. And I think that's just another really great reason why designers should do this, even if the rest of the team doesn't adopt the framework, like you said, the culture. It's just a great way to just sort of think about that.
Yeah, you need to start small, really. And yes, the first 1, 2, 3 might not go the way you want, but then you learn how to do it really well.
All right, I love this. So the next thing I want to talk about, before we get out of here, I want to talk a little bit more about pitfalls and things like that. But the last thing I want to talk about before we do that is the role of AI and large language models, GPT, Claude, whatever your flavor of choice is. The first thing I can think of people doing is let me go find a custom GPT or create a GPT that writes these for me. And I'll tell you my opinion on that first, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. But to me, that sort of defeats the entire point and the entire purpose of doing this. The point is not to write the PRFAQ. Obviously, there is, feedback, and then maybe it's half of it, I guess, to get feedback from the team. But the biggest value, I think, is for you as the author to think about all of these things and put it down on paper, as you've mentioned before. So I'm curious what your thoughts are as it relates to AI writing these things, and how do you feel like AI might fit in? And maybe it's beneficial for certain things, but I'm curious, when you're thinking about authoring a PRFAQ, what would the role of AI be from your expert opinion, and how would you advise people to use AI or not through this process?
Yes, that's a great question. That's the question of the day, right? So I do have a custom GPT for PRFAQ, by the way. If you go to the book website, scroll to the bottom, at the footer, there is a link. I keep feeding it more documents so it learns. You're right. What you said is completely right. You cannot think critically if the AI is doing the writing for you. If you're just reading the output of AI and say like, wow, this looks really good, you're not doing thinking. You're just like a consumer of content there. So you have to do the writing. That is very important, even if it is uncomfortable, because you're exercising parts of your brain that you wouldn't have otherwise. But there are two other use cases that I think AI are very good for. The number one is to help you with research or brainstorming ideas. So AI is really good at like, give me the pros and cons of this, or like, where can I find information about that? Or, what are 7 solutions for this problem? And you look at that, and most of the time when I look at that, I'm like, this is not good, right? You discard, but get your brain going on the right direction. So you can use here. Then you do the writing, which is the middle part. And the other part that AI is really good at, that very few people use it, is critiquing your work. And that's very interesting. Like, you can go to AI, upload a PRFAQ and ask like, critique this document. provide feedback on this document, or just a paragraph. It doesn't even have to be the entire document. Like, tell me this paragraph, what do you think? Like one of the FAQs, like what problem we're trying to solve, you answer it, give to AI and say like, comment on this. What it does is a superb job of finding small things that you missed, right? One of those that I found very useful is like, this concept that you use here is not very clear. And I read it again and I'm like, oh, it's true. It's not very clear. I'm using like something that was on my brain and like I really understood really well, but I don't explain how it connects A to C. Like I skip B, right? And AI is really good at catching that kind of stuff for you. So it provides you some feedback, almost like an editor, like leading your text and providing you with this information. So I think that's a very useful way to use AI.
Yeah, that's actually I wasn't even thinking about having it critique. The first thing I thought of was going and having AI write this for you. That's a really great way to think about that. And I love that. That's great. I love that a lot. Yeah. So, and you said you had a GPT. Is that GPT meant to critique? Is it meant to write, or is it meant to help you write if you maybe write in the first one just as sort of a guide? Or what is that GPT? How do you expect people to use that?
It's optimized for critiquing and to help you early on with understanding what you need to have on your PRFAQ. So that's the kind of information that I'm feeding into it. I'm sure you can strong arm it to write for you, but I strongly advise you not to. Like you really do want to do the writing.
Yeah, that's sort of where my head went at first too, is, the whole value of this is the writing part, it's the thinking part. Having it write it for you seems to defeat the entire purpose of it. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about before we get out of here, let's talk a little bit about pitfalls and tips for people. So things you might have seen people do or things you think people should try to do, tips and pitfalls. What do you got? Any thoughts?
I think the number one mistake that I see people making with PRFAQ is that they think it's a plan. So they include like feature list and detailed roadmap and list of activities and everything that someone needs to do. It's not a plan. It's what you do before a plan, right? So often I say like the PRFAQ give you permission to start on a plan. Don't think of it as like, I need to include all the tactical information on the PRFAQ. That's the wrong thing. And that's why you should avoid like wireframes and screens and diagrams, because that is like part of the execution plan. And you don't want that on a PRFAQ. The second thing is people sometimes write the PRFAQ and they're too much on the side of storytelling or too much on the side of data, right? And like if you have someone that is like very analytical, they're going to write like about all the numbers and the customers and the research that they've done, but they don't connect with the customer and the story and that element that really make people inspired to work on it. And then you have the other side, which are people that are really good at story, but like no data. Like, how can we make decisions if you have no data? So try to find the sweet spot, which is what I call precise writing. I have a chapter on the book about this as well, where you have data, but you will also tell the story of the impact of the problem, of the market, of the situation. So is the right balance between story and data.
Yeah, that's great. Though that's again, I think it's one of those things where, to me at least, it seems like just trial and error. Just try it for yourself. Give it a start. See how it goes, and then the next time you do it, change it up. Maybe if it didn't work, if something wasn't exactly right, do it better next time, or do it differently next time. So I kind of see this as sort of like an evolution for you personally. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I would imagine there's parts of the framework that may apply to you, and some things might work for you and your team, but other teams maybe not. And so, take the book, take the framework and apply it how you think works for you. I mean, you mentioned, you've applied this or thought about a framework as it relates to Amazon, but it's not exactly how Amazon does it. So, there's probably some things that you could take away, some things that might work for you, might not. So anyway, I don't know. Give the book a read. I think it's well worth the time. And I think you might benefit greatly from it. And I am excited to try it personally. So I love that. All right. So Marcello, we are almost out of time. We've had you for a while now. I've got a few questions I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you and give yourself a plug, let everybody know where they can find the book and all that stuff.
Yeah, the book website has lots of resources for everyone and can find all my contact information there. To get to the book website, the easiest one is go to Google and search for PRFAQ book. It's going to be the result number one, and you can find everything there.
All right. Sounds good. And we'll include all of that stuff in the show notes. So you can check that out at beyonduxdesign.com or wherever you get your podcasts. All right. So like I said, Marcelo, we got a few questions I like to ask all our guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. First thing that comes to your mind, you don't have to think too hard about it. Since you're not a designer, these might be a little bit easy for you. But first up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Yeah, since we are talking to an audience of designers, I'm going to recommend the Lean Product Playbook by Dan Olson. It's a great, great book that captures all aspects of building product, from technology, design, product management, go-to-market. Like it really well written.
All right. I love it. We'll have to check that out. I don't think I've heard of that one. Dan Olson, you said?
Yes.
Was that the author? Dan Olson. I'll have to check that out. That one sounds like a good one. I would love to get into that one. All right. Next up, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
I'm really a fan of the Acquired FM podcast. Two friends of mine that have that podcast, and they tell the story of companies. And they go super early when like the person was just a kid or a teenager, and explain like how that company got to be. So they talk stories about Costco and Starbucks and Microsoft and everything. And it's fascinating. Super long though. Like the episodes are 4 hours long sometimes.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. There's like a bunch of history podcasts that I listen to that are like similar. Dan Carlin and Hardcore History, things like that. 4 hours long. But I don't know. You get into it though, So it's great. Do they interview people too? Or is it just they do the
sometimes,
research?
But most of the time it's like just them talking about two people talking, and like they did all the research about everything they couldn't find about a company.
That is so cool. I have to check that out. I love that. I love that kind of stuff. I dig that. All right. Next up, what is your favorite meal? You mentioned cooking, elaborate meals.
Ooh.
So you cook or maybe...
I do cook. I love cooking, and I love push the boundaries on my cooking as well, to try like whatever, French, Spanish, Italian, Thai, Japanese. I'm really a big fan of Asian food. I love it. So it's hard to pick one meal, but like every time I get asked, I would say like sushi is probably my favorite, but I love Korean. I love Thai, Japanese, Chinese, love Asian. And I'm lucky because in Seattle, we have lots of those.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you guys are close. The seafood out that way, the fresh seafood, the sushi, lots of Asian options. I'm in the Midwest. I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, so we don't have nearly as many out here, which is kind of sad. But I'm a huge Vietnamese food. I love Vietnamese food.
Love it.
That's one of my favorites. All right. Next up, what is your favorite vacation spot?
I would have to go with Greece. I've been there a couple of times, and it's amazing. The food, the people, the scenery.
Yeah. Any particular part of Greece, like the beach or like further inland or where the big cities
usually,
or the small little villages?
When you go to Greece, you go to the islands. They have, I don't know, hundreds of islands. And yes, you can go to the popular one like Santorini, but they're like overflowing with tourists. But they have like very small islands that have very, very few tourists that you enjoy a lot more.
Yeah, I love that. I've never had a chance to go, but
it's a little far,
Yeah.
But when you get there, it's great.
I love it. I love it. All right. Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
I'm going to say you might remember this or not, but when I was a teenager, I started using CorelDRAW.
Yeah, correct.
And then once that went away, I started using Illustrator, and I still use Illustrator every once in a while to do my things. It's my favorite. I'm not very good at it, but like it's one that I know how to use.
Yeah, I love Illustrator personally. I use Figma a lot, obviously, as a designer, but when it comes to designing, especially like logos or vector art, things like that, Figma can do it, but it's certainly not as, I don't think it's full, it's not nearly as full featured as something like Illustrator that's meant for that. Anyway, I love Illustrator. I'm a sucker, and I'm still paying for the Adobe Creative Suite every month. I don't know why. I catch it on sale on Black Friday, and I just get it for the year, so I get half off. So that's the way to do it. All right, Marcelo, that's it. That's all we've got today. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Before we get out of here, one more time, where can people find the book before we get out of here?
Yeah, just go to Google and search for PRFAQ book, and you'll find the book website.
All right. Awesome. And we will include all of that in the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. Marcelo, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Marcelo and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on the PRFAQ framework and how you and your team can use it to help you make better decisions about go, no go. But I'm curious, have you ever heard of the PRFAQ framework before? Is this the first time? If you have heard about it before, I'd love to know if you've used it. Has it worked for you? I'd love to hear your experiences. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful and wanted to tell them about it, that would be fantastic. Don't forget to check out the Beyond UX Design shop. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful UX-themed art prints and digital downloads you can print yourself. Grab your paperback copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft, Beyond Pixels and Prototypes. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to get your print on. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, and Adina, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to the video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And if you're ready to escape the 9-to-5 and build your own business, Backlog is the community for you. Join a dedicated network sharing tactics, strategies, and systems for success. Start your journey to independence with Backlog. Don't miss out. Visit beyonduxdesign.com/backlog today. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. And this is something I think designers can help. Oh, geez, my camera just stopped. Hold on. This stupid wire. Oh, there we go.